Good morning. I'm Craig Cashman. I'm the Executive Director of the Watershed Ag Council. We both want to welcome you and thank you for coming again. Our mission really is to support working landscapes in any shape or fashion that we can. We're not just an environmental organization. We really want agriculture to survive and thrive here. So with that, I hope you get a tremendous amount out of today, and I'll turn it over to Sonia.
Good morning. Good morning. So this is exciting for me because, as Craig pointed out, this is my first farm-to-market connection. I think I've attended 3 now, or 3 including this one, but this is the first time I'm up here and I'm addressing this group. So there are a lot of familiar faces. Thank you all for coming. And there are a lot of new faces, and so I encourage each of you that I don't know to, at some point in time, meet me and shake my hand. I really want to know you and what you do and how you can work with the Farm to Market program. So we're running a little bit late this morning, so I'm going to actually just go right into introducing our speakers for the State of the Food Shed address, which will be both Rebecca Morgan and Jennifer Grossman. So let's start with a little introduction to these ladies. Rebecca is currently the Executive Director for the Center for Agricultural Development and Entrepreneurship. She was born in Walton, and she went on to organic vegetable farming and international human rights work, which then led to a focus on food system rights and economic development. She led the National Immigrant Farming Initiative for Heifer International, and she holds a degree in Political Economy and Women's Studies from Wesleyan University and a master's from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs. Jennifer has more than 20 years of strategic environmental legal experience, most recently as a conservation consultant in her own firm and as a founding partner of Longdrift, an ecotourism company providing unique angling adventures in Argentina. Working with the Natural Resources Defense Council, she's designing a New York Regional Food Shed initiative and forging collaborative platforms between rural and urban communities. She also spent 11 years as the Vice President of Land Acquisition for the Open Space Institute. She holds a JD from Boston University of Law and a BA from Binghamton University. So without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Jennifer Grossman and Rebecca Morgan. Enjoy your day. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. This is a great gathering of people, as Sonia said, familiar faces and new ones. But what's really exciting is that the audience is made up of people that make things happen. This is a group that has the potential to transform communities, make changes, innovate, and be leaders. So it's exciting for us to be together in this venue to talk and to share. So while Rebecca and I will give you some insights and ideas, we really encourage this to be interactive, and at the end of our presentation, we hope we'll have time for some questions, and if not, again, throughout the day, please, continue the discussions that we're starting now. And one of the things that we wanted to really impress upon you in this State of the Food Shed are 2 key concepts. One is urgency, and one is optimism. And the reason why we have urgency is because now is the time that we're dealing with some very serious issues and crises with our food system. That's one of the reasons why we're here today, is how do we do a ground-up fix to what we're seeing coming top-down from a broken food system. And I wanted to run through some of the symptoms and some of the results and evidence that we see from a broken food system. And one of the I think, most transitional points for our food system came in the 1950s, when petroleum really entered the scene of agriculture, and our diversified small family farms were replaced by monocultures. And this was really something that was encouraged by federal government policy. And it focused on industrialization, it focused on concentration, and that really, again, replaced our unique family farm setting. And what that did was create unhealthy, cheap food. And that's when we hear about the $1.99 Happy Meal not really being just $1.99. If you think about the externalities, the other costs associated with unhealthy food, that's not included in a $1.99 Happy Meal. So it's not so happy, and it's not so cheap. The other thing that this unintentional consequence of our progress led to, that these federal subsidies supported, was the vulnerability of these farms, these single crop declines, these market collapses. This gave us a lot more vulnerability to climate change, and we're seeing that now also. Droughts that are going on in the Midwest, the impacts that it has on our corn and feed prices. Even globally, for example, I just heard that olive oil is going to increase tremendously this summer because of what's happened in Spain with a 62% decline in the olive crops because of the drought. So we'll see these types of things going on because of the monocultures that our government programs have sort of intensified and encouraged. The other thing that we see, which is a tremendous impact, is on our children. And when you look at obesity and malnutrition, there's a real concern here. In New York State alone, 2/3 of our adult population is considered obese. That cost us $11 billion in 2011. $11 billion to take care of 60+% of our population. 4.3 of that came from Medicaid. That's us. That's taxpayer dollars. If you look at our children, 1/3 of our kids just alone in New York City are considered obese. That's about 1.5 million kids. 1 out of 5 kids under the age of 25 have something called type 2 diabetes now. That used to be called adult onset. It's no longer setting in adulthood. It's happening at 6, 8, and 10-year-olds. All of that, again, is a symptom of a food system that's providing the type and quality of food to the young people in our state, in our country, and causing them to have these nutrition-related ailments. One of the other very disturbing things is not just the impact on our human health, but on our farmland health. We are losing farmland in the United States 2 acres every minute. That's a really scary fact, because as we know, once you pave it over, you don't get it back. Once you grow houses, you can't any longer grow trees or crops or livestock. In New York State alone, we lose about 26,000 acres of farmland a year. That's about 1 farm lost every 3.5 days. In the last 10 years, what we saw was almost 5% of our farms being reduced in the state, over 600,000 acres. And that's really ironic if you think about, is that commensurate with population change? Are we building on our farmland because we need it, we need to grow houses, we need to put things on there? Well, no. Our population only changed 2.6% during that same period that we saw 30% of our farmland developed. So it's not commensurate. It's not a natural, rational way of developing and managing our natural resource base. The other thing that we're seeing, and a lot of you are personally experiencing this, is the average age of the American farmer. Our farmers are aging. The average age is 57 in this country. And in New York State, there are 5 more farmers over the age of 65 than there are under the age of 35. So not only are we losing the farmland to grow our food on, and the food that we're generating from the farms we have is not healthy food, we don't have enough people to raise the food that we need. If you look at what's going on with our population in the world, we've got about 7 billion people. We're going to go up to 9 billion, 2 more billion, and we're going to need to raise our food production by 70% to accommodate that additional 2 billion people. So we need more farmers to do that. Without question, we are needing to support that infrastructure of raising our future farmers. The other thing that we're seeing is not just the unhealthy food, but really dangerous food. When we talk about food labeling, we've got some big problems in this country. As we know, and you've probably been reading about, GMO foods, genetically modified foods, are not required to be labeled. Some states are trying to do that independently: Maine, Vermont, Pennsylvania, even some stores, Whole Foods, Ben & Jerry's, they're choosing to voluntarily label. But otherwise, we don't label GMO foods. And that's something important to know about. Our body digests things differently when they're genetically altered. Another thing that we don't have on a label is carbon monoxide, for example. I just learned this. Carbon monoxide is added to meat, to red meat, to keep the red color lasting longer. And that's not required to be added on a label because the FDA says that is a secondary food additive. So it's okay to do that to your meat. The other thing is antibiotics. We typically don't have labels of antibiotics that come into our food, but again, what's going on with antibiotics? 75% of the antibiotics in our food animals are given to them for growth, not as therapy, not as a result of a sickness or an illness. And of all of those antibiotics, 60% are the exact same kind that we take when we're sick. So what we're seeing now is this resistance, both in our children and our aging population particularly, that they're not responding to antibiotics because so much of that is in the food that we're naturally eating. They also say that 75% of the infectious diseases, the brand new diseases that we're seeing, are tracked back to the animal meat consumption that's been treated with antibiotics. The last thing that I just want to talk about in terms of how our food system is in crisis is also the waste that we see and the capacity to be more efficient. 40% of the food that's produced in this country doesn't even reach the plate. That's more than a third, 40%. Just think about that. It never gets to the table. It's rotting in supermarkets or on trucks. The expiration dates, which are located on a lot of our foods, there's no standard for that. That's really a manufacturer's decision. So many manufacturers might put an expiration date that is maybe a little sooner because they want you to replace it quicker. They want you to throw that out of your fridge if it's 2 or 3 days old based on the expiration date and replace it. But there's been a whole movement afoot to really investigate what is the true expiration of the food value. The other thing is in terms of not being penny wise or pound wise for that matter, is our food costs. The United States has unfortunately enjoyed really cheap food for a really long time. We spend about 8 to 12% of our adjusted gross income on food. The rest of the world spends 30 to 50% of their income on food. So we've never really understood the true cost of food. So one of the things that we'd like to focus on today is how do we create a greater respect, a better understanding, and better efficiency in our food system. And a lot of that comes through localization. It's a social movement. It's something that really requires that we bring together stakeholders at all levels, from production to purchasing, and start to think about how we reinvigorate a local food system.
So, having started there, so the growth of the local food movement is, of course, in response to the destruction of the current global food system, which, as we know, is in crisis here. And what is taking place in the local food movement is inspiring. Urban dwellers are tilling vacant lots, they're laying irrigation pipes, they're bringing in topsoil, they're saving and swapping seeds. Neighbors are encouraging each other to exercise and eat better. There's Michelle Obama, of course. Farmers are aggregating produce to increase efficiency and distribution mechanisms. Immigrant farmers are increasingly at the table, which is also very key. They're adapting seasoned skills and intensely effective work habits to farming in a new environment and accessing new communities with appropriate food. Urban young adults are starting farms on rooftops, increasingly often relocating either part-time or full-time into a rural environment. Year-round greenhouses are slowly moving off the grid, getting away from the fossil fuels. Urban, suburban, and rural groups are launching exciting new local food efforts in our region and in New York State and nationally. Farm and food businesses are realizing that they have to work more directly with each other in order to get the high-quality product to their tables or to their shelves and get the cost benefits back to the farmers. Social investment opportunities are increasing for rural and farming endeavors and opportunities. Farmers are increasingly using sustainable production techniques. Grass-fed and rotational livestock operations are improving our understanding of how we can utilize the natural resources most available to us, the pasture, the grass, in our region specifically. And critically, to acknowledge, particularly for this group, the demand for local food in New York City is entirely unmet. How we meet that demand is a learning curve, and we're getting on it. But there's market opportunity there, and we are New York City's local food shed. We are part of New York City's local food shed. When people in New York City want local food, they look to New Jersey, they look a little bit south, and they look often to upstate New York. So it's important that we recognize, local can mean our little town, and local also means our larger region. The food system is, it really is a disparate constellation of efforts that are erupting both rapidly, simultaneously, and independently. It's hard to measure this progress, but it is happening, and increasingly, more academics are sort of trying to study it and get baseline data for, what is the return to the community by the local foods movement, and those numbers are encouraging. I was trying to pull a bunch of numbers from the 2007 Ag Census, but frankly, I think in a lot of ways it's already irrelevant. I think there have been enough changes within the local food movement specifically from 2007 to 2012 that it almost feels like we don't need more statistics about the growing number of farmers markets and the growing number of CSAs. We know that those efforts are taking place increasingly. But that said, in the last 2 decades, obviously there was this huge push to bring the producer directly in touch with the consumer. So the farmers markets and the CSAs was the best mechanism to do that, and a lot of huge success has been garnered by that effort. In some upstate rural communities, the farmers markets are saturated and they're not well utilized. And so now people are having to sort of adjust to new paradigms, and that is where the food hub has enormous potential for our upstate producers, linking them to consumers. And obviously that's going to be the focus of the next topic, so we won't go into that. But the farmers market moment is also changing. As people will know too, there are farmers who know that going to the farmers market, harvesting and packing their truck and schlepping to the market and standing in the rain for 4 hours and coming home with $200 in your pocket isn't always the best recourse. And while that serves a really key role, and I am not by any means disparaging the farmers market, I do think it is time, and everybody obviously recognizes that it is time to sort of understand and appreciate new models of getting the product around. And again, I'm excited to have all of the focus on the food hubs that's at this conference and in the future. So increasingly, we see that something powerful is taking place, and it is shifting our food system as we know it. And it is clear that what is happening is that the local food movement is capturing a resistance to the destructive global food system. It's reclaiming local agricultural identity, and we're restoring a long-lost connection to food and farming. And there are some key components that a local food movement that are critical to a local food movement, and they are trust. We trust that local food from small and mid-sized farms is produced with more consideration towards sustainability. We trust that the reduction in transportation from field to plate matters in a big picture way. We trust that local food provides more opportunity for rural economic recovery and viability. And we trust that when people in restaurants see Mountain Dell Farm salad and Stony Creek Farm beef and Harpersfield cheese, we trust that they're getting a higher quality product than if the food were imported from across the globe. And there are, in fact, academic studies that support the qualities that make food and farm businesses particularly successful in this emerging movement. And trust and loyalty is the #1 factor between farmers and consumers. So the question to us, of course, is how do we grow the movement while maintaining that trust? A second quality for success is resilience. It's a blend of close, again, in your community close, and distant, the nearest urban center where there's growing market opportunity markets. It's opting for greener technology on farms, maintaining summer and winter product supply and consistency, and continually developing innovative marketing strategies. And they're all healthy ingredients to resilience. And then finally, recycling is another key success in farm and food business growth. And by recycling, they're talking about building financial flows that recycle money and other resources through local communities, which builds the local economic multipliers. Go local food movement.
Yeah, no, and and we're seeing signs of this stimulation in so many ways. And one of the things to start with any effort, with any project, is what are your natural assets? What do you have to work with? What are the key components? So start and look at New York State. We're an agricultural state. More than 25 crops that we produce here, we rank in the top 5 nationally. So again, we're number 2 in the country for apples. That's New York State's largest food crop. We're 4th in the country for milk. We had $2.5 billion in sales of milk products alone in 2010. We rank 1st in sour cream and cottage cheese. And our yogurt production increased 140% since 2008. If you go to maple syrup, we're 2nd in the country, 2nd for cabbage in the country. We're 4th in the country for tart and sweet cherries and pears, and we're 2nd in the country for wine, 3rd for grapes and grape juice. So we've got natural capacity when you look at New York State. 36,000 farms, almost all of them family owned and operated. That's about 7 million acres, or 25% of the land area of New York State. These farms in the aggregate generate about $4.5 billion a year in economic stimulation for New York State. And if you really try to evaluate how that affects the other economies, food producers, food industries, food service providers, all of the infrastructure, that raises to almost $32 billion a year. That's significant economic growth. So not only do we have the natural capacity in New York State, we're showing there's evidence of economic stimulation because we're able to sell our products and we're ranking very, very highly nationally. And as Rebecca just mentioned with New York City, there's an unmet demand of almost $1 billion a year. And in 2005, a report was done and it came out to like $866 million. Well, again, that was a long while ago, and the food movement has jumped huge steps ahead in that time frame. So we can very reasonably say we've probably got over $1 billion of unmet local demand 2 hours away from us. There's 20 million people in the New York City metropolitan area, about 10 million in the city, then you've got those around the area. These are people that are interested, willing, and able to find and procure local food. So we've got a market there. We've got that set up. Then if you also look at the Catskill region in particular, not only are we that proximate to New York City, we've got one of the most important components of food production in the world, and it's called water. We've got the largest unfiltered public water supply system in the world here. New York City residents get their water from here. Some other folks in Westchester get it as well. There's no other place in the world that has an unfiltered public water supply system like we have. There are water stresses occurring all around the country. We hear about it more and more every day. Climate change is not an if, it's a when. And it's something that we don't have to focus on now as to the negative. It's sort of, now we've got it. And I don't ever want to hear you don't realize what you got till it's gone, because we're never going to do that here. We're going to appreciate and understand and respect the natural resource base. Fresh water on this planet is 2.5% of all the water on this planet. Okay, so 97.5% of the water on this earth is salt water. We can't use to grow our food, to brush our teeth, to clean our cars, to water our gardens, none of that. So 2.5% is fresh. Of the fresh water, 1/3 of it is accessible, which means 2/3 is locked up in ice flows or other unaccessible water resources. So we've got 1/3 of 2.5% of fresh water to deal with on the planet. And we, in the Catskills, have fresh, clean water. There's nothing more abundant or important when it comes to food. So what we've got to understand is how valuable that asset is, how unique we are from a lot of the other places in New York State that do local food, and identify that as a really wonderful asset and protect it.
And yet, the challenge remains, given that we have these great natural resources, given that we have these great market opportunities, why is it so difficult for a small-scale, sustainable producer to make a living or be economically viable? I wish I had an answer. Does anyone have an answer? So that's obviously a huge question. And how do we continue to increase and improve that viability to the producers so that more people are inspired to come and utilize the resources and grow food and access the markets and support their families. And another challenge remains, which is, accessing the New York City growing demand for the local food is terrific, and it's an opportunity, and people should go for it. But how do we also improve the access to the limited resource households in our own communities? So let's just look at Delaware County as a snapshot. Delaware County, in 2009, had a poverty rate of 15% compared to 14% in New York State. 31.5% of preschool children ages 0 through 4 in Delaware County live in poverty, and that's compared to a statewide number of 21%. The change in the poverty rate from 2000 to 2009 in Delaware County was plus 2.3%. In New York State, it was just plus 1%. The 2012 participation in free and reduced lunch programs in Delaware County is 53%. In New York State, it's 35%. So in 2011, the SNAP participation, which is the new food stamp model, was over 6,000 people. And that doesn't capture a lot of the people who qualify for those SNAP benefits that don't go because it is such an inhumane system on so many levels that a lot of people just say, screw it, it's not even worth the humiliation to go through it. So that said, these are hard times for many, many families in Delaware County. And of course, when you go to Walmart, as I did yesterday when I'm trying to do this comparative analysis, you can buy, for the amount of money that you can buy 2 pounds of organic baby spinach, you can buy 13 Hungry Man dinners, frozen dinners. So it's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer when you're a family trying to feed children and you don't have a lot of money, where you're going to spend your food. So how do we change that paradigm? I mean, it is devastating. It is devastating that that's the case. It is devastating that those are the choices that people make. It is devastating that people have lost and continue to lose the art and skill of cooking, the capacity to feed a family with whole foods, real foods that do break down more cheaply. If you buy, if you grow some food or you buy a chicken and the potatoes, all of these studies have been done. I'm sure all of you have read them. You can actually take a roast chicken, roast it, make the soup, make the sandwiches, have the whole thing last for a damn week, and you do in the long run end up saving money than the Hungry Man dinners, obviously, and of course, and we know this. But how do we change the thinking? How do we change the paradigm? How do we compete with the campaigning of McDonald's? And that's a tall order, but it's a battle we have to fight. And there are, again, farmers and community members are coming up with local and innovative ways to reach those particular limited resource households with local food efforts. There are mobile farmers markets because we're seeing that the SNAP coupons and the WIC coupons are entirely underutilized at the local farmers markets. There was sort of a redemption rate of less than 70% in Delaware County. So how do we bring the food more to the people that need it and can redeem some of those coupons and federal subsidization programs in order to purchase it? Mobile farmers markets are one method of doing it. Getting the farm to school programs more robust, bringing the local food into the cafeterias where many, over 50%, get free and reduced breakfasts and lunches. So increasing the farm to school capacity. There are a lot of innovative ways, and people are chipping away at that big block.
And the thing is that, when we try to figure out how do we chip away at that block and what is the block, you look at a stakeholder analysis. Who's involved from production all the way through consumption? So you need to think of the types of infrastructure that are needed for agriculture. It's a business like everything else. It's an industry. And when you look at an industry, you have to provide access to newcomers, which means make sure that the newcomers involved there get land and can afford land and have the infrastructure and the mentoring and the background. And you have to have a consistent market, meaning that you have a capacity to sell what you make for a fair price. So understanding what an industry requires, we've looked at all of the ways to chip into this system. So one is importantly aggregation, and we'll hear today from folks talking about food hubs, talking about a report that's coming out that's really, I think, going to be just amazingly transformative for the entire New York State area, but particularly this region, because we can locate food hub areas very close to our production sites that create efficiencies in transportation that we just don't currently have. It also gives our farmers and those that are producing more time to do what they want to do and what they should be doing, and less time on the road and behind a table. So it makes a lot of sense. One of the big things also about aggregation is distribution into New York City. If you look at the Hunts Point market, Hunts Point is in the Bronx, in the South Bronx in New York City. So it serves about 22 million people. In terms of the food that goes through there, it gets eaten by 22 million people. That's about 7% of the United States population. 4% of that food is from New York State, only 4%. And it's the largest wholesale produce market in the country. So what's the problem there? Because New York State, which I just said before, we're an agricultural state. We rank in so many crops, the top 25. Why is our food not more readily available at a wholesale level? So we're not just talking about CSAs. We're not just talking about farmers markets or this wonderful consumer direct connection with farmers and the folks that are actually eating the food. But institutional purchasers. What about hospitals and schools? What about New York City schools? Does anyone realize that New York City schools are the second largest food purchaser in the country, second only to the United States Department of Defense? New York City schools and 1,200 schools serve about 900,000 meals a day. If a small percentage of that was committed to buying local, every apple, every glass of milk, every chicken, came from a New York State farm, how we could transform financially the face of agriculture just by one purchaser. So we need to think about how do we access these more innovative directions of getting our food from our fields onto the tables. It also involves education. So we've got a lot going on when we talk about education. We've got programs in our schools where children are learning more about growing gardens. We've got folks in this audience that are working to train future farmers. We've got folks in this audience also that are out doing incredible work at schools, teaching kids there that food is a connective element for them. It's not something that they just purchase at a store that's under some plastic wrap. It's something they could be proud of, that has a smell to it, that they get a sense of pride. The other thing that we need to really think about is we have a capacity to raise money and be more efficient in our land use. And that's something interesting that I found when looking at the stats from just Sullivan County alone. Even though we lost 11,000 acres of farmland over the last 12 years, we increased our economic impact from agriculture by $85 million. So it's interesting, and that requires, I think, a deeper dive to kind of analyze why and how. But it does say that there is efficiencies, and there are ways to better use what we have to be more economical. And the key, again, is about a stakeholder evaluation. All of these components have people that participate in the food system, and every single one of them, especially the farmer, needs to be receiving a return that is fair. And that's one of the goals that we're going to talk about later today in a lot of the breakout sessions, is how do we create fair pricing for everybody involved in the food system.
So just to emphasize and highlight a couple very local efforts that are taking place that are really exciting, really innovative. Milk Not Jails. Is Lauren Melodia here, by the way? I know she was trying to be here. Anyway, Milk Not Jails is this really great dairy marketing and distribution cooperative in New York City that has a political agenda of revitalizing the upstate economy that clings so tightly to the prison system as a way of keeping jobs in the communities, and instead replacing that with reinvigorating the dairy industry. And they have dairy CSAs in New York City, they sell into institutions in New York City, and they are very eager and needing to work with more dairy farmers that can get their product to them, to the consumer. And again, these dairy CSAs in New York City, there is unmet demand. People want real milk from real farms, and they're obviously not dealing with the raw milk because that's a whole federal issue, but even, going through a processing capacity, coming into the house, not going just to who knows where all of our milk goes to from here. Lucky Dog Local Food Hub is a new initiative that is happening at Lucky Dog Farm. Lucky Dog has a refrigerated truck that goes to New York City every week, and it has capacity to take at least 6 more pallets of produce on it a week. So it's one of those from the bottom up. If you want your product in the city and you want to get it to Lucky Dog on the day that they're heading to the city, it is there, it is happening. Let's utilize the systems that are already in place to get the product to the consumer. The National Young Farmers Coalition, which is just a coalition that I really love. It's a very vibrant group, a farmer-led national network of young and sustainable farmers, and they organize and they host meetings, and they have parties at conferences around the country, and they're doing innovative things, and they use technology and develop apps, and they're amazing. And they do farm hack work, which is like sharing and technological innovations. So they're very exciting. In Bloomville, very recently, Rural Eats, which is a small, a group of people, consumers and farmers that are coming together that are just tussling with the same question. How do we increase and improve the access to local food by our local communities? What does it mean to make the next step into market opportunities? Again, just spontaneous efforts of community food groups cropping up.
And the new crop of farmers. I mean, we've got the craft folks here today. We've got Cornell Cooperative Extensions in the counties that we work in and live in that do great training programs. And there's incubator programs that are growing up all over. In fact, there's a real big push for the first time to develop a network of farmer training initiatives. So for example, the Glenwood Center and the Open Space Institute are going to be partnering on a great small livestock incubator farmer training program in Ulster County. You've got the New World Foundation that's going to be starting a new incubator farm training program also in Ulster County. There's the Hawthorne Valley folks, the Stone Barn folks. These are people that are training the future farmers of America on longer term 3-4 year programs that really provide the intense on the ground connection to how to best have sustainable practices, natural resource preservation, and efficiency in your farm practices. One of the great things also about this Catskill region in particular, as a source for all of these incubators, is the affordability of land. So all of these new farmers that are graduating, we call them sort of non-generational farmers in the sense they're not coming from a farm background or history. They can come to the Catskills and they could buy land here. It's more affordable than most places in the New York State area with such proximity to New York City and other major markets. So we've got a great opportunity to make our land more affordable, which is exactly what the Catskill Farm Link is doing. We're connecting landowners who have land to rent. We're connecting landowners who have land to sell. And we're putting together people through our Catskill Farm Link how to best take advantage of our natural resource base and use it wisely. One of the other exciting things also is the processing capacity that we're seeing developing, which has been, for the most part, in certain sectors, just unheard of. So when you look at red meat processing, we've got red meat processing now more than almost any other area in the Northeast, whether it's Larry's, Steiner's, New York Custom Meats, Eckland's, or the Liberty facility that'll be up and running soon. We have capacity, and that's going to draw other communities to us for that capacity. Then let's look at our heritage for processing barley and hops and grains that we had at the turn of the last century. We were the leader in the country for hops and grain and wheat. And there's an exciting opportunity to get back into that, and we see that with our distilleries here today, Dancing Cat, other breweries that are starting, Catskill Brewery, the Roscoe Brewery, Calicoon Brewery, you've got Bootlegger Distillery, Walton Distillery. It's incredible what's going on.
We like to drink.
And I mean, that's, you want to break bread over the table and have a good drink to talk about these things. We have that capacity here. We can bring that back. The other thing that's exciting is also the dairy world that we have. We have so many folks here in the audience that are doing wonderful value-added products, and that's a great opportunity. Value-added is one of the best ways to get our farmers a better return on their efforts. And if we can add to the processing on all of these components of dairy, of vegetable, of other grains, we have a real opportunity to shift the economic system here, not just the agricultural system, but the economic system.
So, and the good news is that because increasingly more people are entering farming, admittedly, albeit on a smaller scale, and maybe starting with less than 5 acres, but slowly scaling up, there have been increasing studies that have analyzed, well, what makes beginning farming successful? So as most of you know, there are some very clear traits that makes beginning farmers successful, as has been approved and studied by the academics, including, the social context, your appropriate personal characteristics, your suitable business characteristics, and luck. So just to break that down very briefly, social context is key, and it includes access to land, access to capital, access to equipment, suppliers that are conveniently located in your community, practical availability of markets, willing buyers, high price point to the farmers, low transaction costs, supportive family members and significant others who not only value farming, but importantly contribute to labor when that needs to happen. Appropriate personal characteristics, which is, are you somebody that can work long hours, work hard hours, be persistent and persevere, develop appropriate managerial knowledge and technical skills. Do you have flexibility and motivation? Do you learn from a wide variety of information? It seems like these are very basic things, but these are really traits that help beginning farmers stay successful. Suitable business characteristics. Do you have adequate resources? Do you have a sound, rational farm vision and farm plan? Excuse me. Do you have a solid business strategy, a long-term and short-term business strategy? Do you have a good match among your production scale and the technologies and available labor to you? And then the least controllable element is luck. Success in farming is more likely to occur if the farmer is lucky. And unfortunately, we're not talking about Lucky Dog Farm with the recent flooding, but it's obviously an unpredictable component, but it can clearly wipe a farmer out or encourage their good sustained market growth.
And once you've made that decision, and once we can aggregate these farmers, whether they're transitioning, they're existing, or they're new, it's remembering that we're all part of an entire food system. And there's just some key things to remember. There's no silver bullet. There's no one way to fix the system, but there's a lot of things to think about. That, one, we have to be really intentional. That to be competitive, we have to be intentional. We have to look at our assets. We have to look at this in a very clear economic sense, because you know what? It's really much cheaper on the long haul to give our people in this world, in our country, in our state, in our communities, healthy food than to give them insulin, on the other hand. It's a much better way of living. It's a much easier way of living. If you also look at the cost of community services economically, a local food system makes sense. Cows and corn don't go to school. So when you think about what a farm adds to a tax infrastructure, for every dollar that a farmer pays into a tax system, he or she takes out 27 cents from community services. If you're a homeowner and you're paying $1, that community is going to give you $1.29 worth of services. So it's a tax benefit for communities to have farms in them. The other thing that we have to always think about here is we're not creating a new food system. We've got it. We just need to rebuild and utilize the infrastructure that we have now. So this is not starting from scratch. There's no reason to do that. We've got an incredible wealth of wisdom and capacity here. So it's rebuilding and re-envisioning, what that food system is, because there's power to the fork. Wendell Berry says it best: eating is an agricultural act. So we all participate in agriculture by simply sitting down at a table or standing at the counter or eating in your car, however you might do it. We're participating in agriculture, and that means that we're all involved. And if there is involvement at that level of everybody, we have to come up with a strategy that brings everybody in. And that's a movement. That's transformational. That's revolutionary. And it's something that's so broad and expansive, but it comes back to a really simple basic, that local means place. Local is here. Local is where we live. Local is where we walk and see things every day. And it means that we can grow things here with what we've got. We don't need inputs from out there. What can we do here is local. It's not fixed. It's going to shift with nature. It's going to shift with what we can do with our soils and weather and wind. It's going to be directed by us as individuals. It's bottom up. It's always a bottom up approach when it's local. And it allows us a great opportunity to innovate, to take risk, to really learn from one another, and also be inspired by one another. So being local gives us so much of an advantage, and it's exciting that we're all here today to talk about this, because this is the type of opportunity that allows us to move ahead. It really does. The ideas that we germinate here, that we talk about here, can be implemented on the ground, because local is very simple. It's where we are and who we are.
So let's remember, as we're going through our day, that we're talking about food, and it can get pretty abstract in our line of work. And we use words like economic viability, market opportunity, environmental sustainability, enhanced productivity, seasonal extensionality, consumer accessibility, farm traceability, regulatory accountability, resourcefulness, agility, climate change inevitability, grant-seeking inanity, for those of us in the nonprofit world. And entrepreneurial ingenuity, fresh product perishability, shelf life stability, wake up at 4 a.m. ability, be a farmer and still have a good relationship capacity, and so on and so forth. But really, we're talking about food. We're talking about how we feed ourselves and our families. We're talking about how we start traditions around the table, how we forge peace and reconciliation over favorite meals. And it is not easy. The destruction of the current global food system and the development of our alternative local sustainable food system is indeed a long road to hoe. But with efforts such as this conference that Sonia has put together, and the emerging trends and projects we've highlighted here, which are just a fraction of what's happening, we are slowly restoring our broken system. And one day we will be a healthier region as a result. And the state of the food shed is strong.
That was not bad. So I don't know if we have time for questions. Maybe you want to hold it till later. And
Let's be sure we get this published,
yeah.
and the DVD too. Beautiful.
All right. Well, thank you all.
Cheers.
Thank you, Rebecca and Jennifer. I really especially liked Rebecca's last outpouring to the audience. That was wonderful. Thank you. Well, now I want to introduce Sarah Brannon. For those of you who were with us last year, she held a listening session related to research of food hubs in the Hudson Valley. And now she's coming back today to report on that. I think we're getting close to publishing it. And so she's here today to give us a scoop on her research and where she's at. Thanks.
Morning, everybody. How are you doing? So I just drove in from Poughkeepsie, and it's a beautiful drive on a Sunday morning. And so I'm sorry if you already did this exercise, but I always love to see who's in the room, so who I'm talking to. So just by a show of hands, who here is a farmer? Oh, awesome. Okay. Of those farmers, who farms in Sullivan County or Delaware County or somewhere near there? Ulster County? Ulster County, one lone Ulster County back. Oh, two. Okay, great. Other places? Who farms in other places? Where?
Otsego County.
Oh, great. That's farther than Poughkeepsie. Who here is in food distribution or processing or something like that? Intermediary? Great. And who here is a food buyer, like restaurant, institution, something like that? Okay, so primarily farmers. That's good. So I'm not any of those things. I rather do research and planning related to food systems improvement and development. And so what I'm here to talk to you about is sort of a follow-up to my presentation last year. Who here was last year for the presentation? Okay, good, a couple of people. So I'm gonna go through a little bit what this whole project is about that I've been working on this past year and talk to you a little bit about food hubs. So has anybody heard the term food hub before? Oh, good, okay. It's really trendy right now, right? Like everybody's talking about food hubs. I went to the NESOG conference and I swear half the workshops were on food hubs. You couldn't get away from them. It's epidemic right now, but in a good way, in a good way. So Sonia, I need you again. So I work in food systems consulting, and I've been working on a project for the past year with the New World Foundation, which is a foundation Hey, Sonia. Clickety click click. Great. So the New World Foundation is located in New York City, but also does some work up here in the Hudson Valley, particularly in Ulster County. But they're very interested in food systems and sustainable food development. And we've been working on this research project for the past year. I've been leading the research, but we also partnered with Hudson Valley Pattern for Progress and the Urban Design Lab at Columbia. So we had a broad mission that was handed down to us from the foundation. They said, what we want to do is build the capacity and infrastructure for a resilient food system for the benefit of Hudson Valley farmers and communities. It's a lofty goal, right? And a lot of us talk about the term sustainability or viability, but really the term that they used, and one that I really support, is this term resilience. And it really implies not only sustainability, but also economic viability, and the fact that you can't really have one without the other, that we really need to be focused on both of those goals at the same time. So this past year, we did some research to figure out, does the Hudson Valley need a food hub? And then, if so, what would it look like and who would be involved, and would this really help farmers in the communities throughout the Hudson Valley? And embedded in that first question, do we need a food hub, is really a couple of other questions, right? First, we really need to know, what is a food hub anyway? Everybody's talking about them. They seem to be cropping up all over the place. What is it we're even talking about? And I had a vague conception going into this that a food hub is basically a warehouse, and there's lots of really good local food there, and farmers get in their truck and they drive the food there, and then it goes through the warehouse, and then it goes out to all the stores and restaurants, and we as consumers really love it, and it's great, and everybody benefits. But I knew it was a little more complicated than that, and so we said, okay, well, we should do a little research and figure out, what are the experts talking about, right? We need to become one of these experts. We need to go out, figure out what's the USDA saying, what are the other food hubs doing, what do they look like, who are they, why are they here, and do we really need one of these things here? And what does the value chain in the Hudson Valley look like? And I'll talk about what we mean by value chain in a moment. But really, who's out there doing this work already? Are we starting from scratch? Do we really need one of these things? What are the actual needs on the ground? Because whatever we do, whatever the foundation wants to support, we want to make sure it's grounded in reality and it's going to be helpful to the people on the ground. That's why we're here. So first set of questions was, why are food hubs coming into existence? Why are we even talking about this? It seems like they've come out of nowhere, but all of a sudden everybody knows there's this food hub thing out there, and a lot of people want one. Everybody wants a food hub nowadays. And so we set to figuring out, what is this thing? Why are we here? Why are they here? Who are they? So there's a few things that we learned over the past year about food hubs. So the reason why they seem to be coming into existence is because there's a lot of challenges in the food system, right? We know a lot of them: loss of farms and farmland acres, pressures on small and mid-sized farms in particular, and the competition that really pinches them in the current food system. But then also there's some anecdotal evidence about, I'm too loud.
No, we're not getting enough.
And then there's some anecdotal evidence. We keep hearing from people, we need infrastructure, we need infrastructure, we need processing and warehousing and trucks, and we need infrastructure. And so that seems to be the motivations for food hubs development. So I don't have to tell you about the loss of farms and farm acres, right? Everybody knows this story. It's not a great story, but it's the reality that we're facing here in the Hudson Valley and also in the Catskills. But there are, I know Jennifer in her wonderful presentation just now was saying, why is it so hard for small and mid-sized farms to compete? Why is it so hard? Well, the basic fact is that the system is not set up to support small and mid-sized farms, and it's not set up to help you become competitive. And to really participate in the system of providing food to people where they buy it the most. And that's basically grocery stores, restaurants, large-scale institutions. That's where we get most of our food. And you as small and mid-sized producers, really, the system is not set up to make it easy for you to tap into those markets. So why is that? Well, that's because the national food system favors large scale, and it fosters consolidation. And this is a decades-long process. This is not something that's new. This is a generations-long process that started back when my grandfather moved off his farm in Ulster County to go to college and never looked back. And it's because this system is set up for opportunities like that, and it's not set up to support the small mid-scale farms and food processors. So just a couple of statistics here. You already know this probably. 12% of farms across the country produce the vast majority of food that we consume, 84%. The top 10 grocery stores have more than 2/3 of all retail sales in the country, and the top 4 broadline wholesalers have almost half of the market. They move almost half the food throughout the country. So how, as small and mid-sized producers or distributors or processors, can we compete in that system? The other thing is that farm size in this country is strongly associated with profitability. So if you're a small farm, and according to the USDA, that means you make less than $100,000 a year in gross sales, on average, the operating profit margin is negative 48%, okay? Now, the truth is, a lot of those might be hobby farms or, recreational farms, but nonetheless, the statistics are pretty stark. Larger farms making over $500,000, in contrast, their operating margin is over 25%. Throughout the Hudson Valley over the past 20 years, these factors have really caused a squeeze, in particular on mid-sized farms. So you see the 2 bars in the middle, you see a decline in mid-sized farms, those making between $100,000 and $500,000. In contrast, you have almost a redoubling, more than a doubling of large farms. So why should we even care about these mid-sized farms? There's a couple reasons. So first, mid-sized farms in the Hudson Valley are an extremely important part of our agricultural fabric and industry. They are more than 25% of all sales, but they control more than half of the ag land in our region. So that's extremely important. If we're talking about loss of farms, difficulties in competition, and also loss of farm acres, we have to home in on mid-sized farms. And if you take that 25% of farms, it's almost 800 farms in the Hudson Valley. And that's a lot of farms, and that's a lot to work with. I also think that mid-sized farms are the greatest opportunity for scaling up the distribution and marketing of local food and higher value food, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Slide. So in addition to these challenges, food hubs are coming into existence not only to address those challenges, but also to seize on some opportunities. And everyone in this room knows what those opportunities are, because that's the whole purpose of this conference, right? To figure out how can we seize on these opportunities. So there's a demand for local, source-identified, and differentiated foods. And I put differentiated in quotes. I really want to draw your attention to this. Differentiated means that the consumer is getting information about where this food is coming from, and it is not commingled and it is not marketed in the same way that conventional or commodity foods are. It is source identified, geographically bound, or identified by other qualities that attach to the food, and that is very, very important to consumers. There's research that the USDA and others have done that demonstrates that consumers won't shell out a little bit more just because food is local. They need to know something else about that food that motivates them to buy it. So it's environmentally sustainable, or they appreciate the production methods, or they know the farm and they want to support that farm and their local economy. Those are all of the attachments that consumers have with those kinds of food products. And so really that's the opportunity, not just putting a label and saying local. That's not going to do it, and that's not going to get you a higher price. But there's also a growing interest in scaling up local food to new venues, larger and wholesale markets. So I'll talk a little bit about some numbers and the difference between the direct-to-consumer market and the wholesale market, and where food hubs fit into all of that. But there's also been a lot of supportive policy on the federal, state, and local levels. One could argue about how supportive it has been, but nonetheless, there are policies out there that people are talking about, and they weren't around 10, 15, 20 years ago to the extent that they are today. So I think maybe we're not seeing all of the effects that we would like to from that dialogue and from those policies, but we're getting there, and at least people are talking about it. So what does the demand look like, right? So we know that there's visible demand out there. We see farmers markets and CSAs all over the place. Somebody told me once, you can't throw a rock in New Paltz without hitting a CSA, and I think that's probably right. But there's also 149 farmers markets throughout the Hudson Valley and New York City region, and that's a lot. So, and these kinds of direct-to-consumer sales, so farmers markets, CSAs, all of that, doubled as a portion of overall farm sales throughout the Hudson Valley over the past generation. But, this is the big but, and this is why we're here talking about food hubs. If you add up all of those direct-to-consumer sales, they are still only a teeny tiny portion of the overall food market. So we appreciate them. They've been at the forefront of opening up the dialogue, but they are not going to get us to where we need to be. Okay? So they are only 0.1% of the overall $30 billion food market in New York City and the Hudson Valley. So that means that there is a huge opportunity out there for us in the Hudson Valley food system to seize on a little bit more of that market demand. We need, in traditional economic terms, a bigger market share. We need to move the ball. So food hubs really are around because we need to scale up. 99% of the food consumed in the U.S. comes through wholesale channels. It's a tiny bit smaller in the Hudson Valley because we do have such a robust direct-to-consumer market, and that's very important for us here. And we all know that farmers markets and CSAs, because they're so visible, they have really helped us grow as an agricultural community over the past 10, 15, 20 years. But again, there is growing interest among larger buyers that are struggling to source local food for a variety of reasons. So for example, the top 4 out of 5 restaurant trends this year are all about local and sustainable foods. That's a huge opportunity. 7 of the 10 largest retailers report some kind of local sourcing programs. Again, a huge opportunity. And 2,000 plus farm-to-school programs have cropped up throughout the nation over the past few years. Again, that is a huge opportunity. Even accounting for all of these direct and a couple of the intermediated marketing of local foods, the local food market, okay, so all the food that is produced here in the Hudson Valley, only currently, in our estimation over the past year, has about a 2% market share. So that's through direct-to-consumer sales, or if you sell, maybe you sell direct to retailers. So we know a lot of farms will also drive to Hannaford or Adams Fair Farms or Peck's Market or something like that. Those are called intermediated channels. So that's the farm getting in the truck and delivering it. Even still, if you add all that up, it's still only about 2% of the local food market. So again, we need to scale up and we need to figure out opportunities for getting into these larger channels. So what does that mean? That means we probably need some infrastructure to do all this. And we knew there was some anecdotal evidence out there that there's a need here in the Hudson Valley for things like packing, aggregation, processing, and just transportation and trucks just moving the food. And so food hubs are emerging as one means for plugging that gap. Go more. So we figured, let's take a look at all these different food hubs and just redefine them. How can we simplify the definition of these food hubs? So I would define food hubs along 2 frames. So the first is the functions and the activities. So what do they do on the ground? What do their activities look like on the ground? So pretty simply, food hubs do 2 different things. They help with distribution and they help with marketing. So distribution is the physical activity of aggregating, processing, packing, providing warehousing and transportation. So just moving boxes of food, distribution. The second thing that food hubs do is marketing. And this is not really marketing, like, I'm not a marketing person. So when somebody said marketing to me, I was like, oh, it sounds, kind of froofy. You put like a pretty label on it, you throw up a website, and now you're marketing. Now you're cooking with gas. But really, marketing in this context is totally different. It's a very active proposition. It's actively going out there and building relationships between buyers and suppliers. It's matching buyers to suppliers on price, product, and volume. And the reason why that's important is because not all buyers can buy from Lucky Dog. They cannot all buy from Hudson Valley Fresh, they need to make sure that the product is available in the volume that they need it, that it's the right kind of product for their market, and that it's the right price. There are different price points out there in the food market. So someone needs to be working on that, what I would call value chain development, that active matchmaking and marketing on price, product, and volume. But just as important as the functions and activities are the mission that drives food hubs. So we talked about the problems that food hubs are trying to respond to and the opportunities that food hubs are trying to respond to. But the way that they define themselves in this new food movement is about moving from supply chain to value chain and finding shared value. And finding shared value is about treating farmers and their suppliers as valuable partners, that they're not just interchangeable anonymous suppliers. They're not just this anonymous box that shows up on the loading dock, that there is a relationship there with that supplier that allows them to make different kinds of business decisions, right? So their business decision on a day-to-day level is not just about the tiny little margin that they're trying to get today. It's about making sure that that farm is in business in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because that they as a food hub, as a business, as an organization, need to make sure that they have a viable supply of product and that that product is doing well and is high quality and that that farmer is going to be around not just this generation but the next generation, because otherwise they're not going to have anything to sell. So it's a different way of doing business. It's about finding shared value, and that's why we call this the value chain instead of just the supply chain, and that's what food hubs are trying to do. And kind of part and parcel to that is the way that we frame externalities, that there's no such thing as externalities when it comes to environment or social outcomes or economic outcomes, that these kinds of things are internal to their business, and that if all of those things are not taken care of externally, that will affect their bottom line. And this is a different way of doing business. It's a different way of thinking about business, and that really is a defining feature of food hubs. So there's almost about 200 of these things throughout the country now, and a couple of things to note. More than half of them have just come into existence in the past 5 years, so this is a very new concept. And USDA did some research with the Wallace Center a couple years ago, and they did some surveys of food hubs, and what they found is that about half of them are not making money. They're not covering costs. They're not yet profitable, or at least just, breaking even. And so that got us thinking, well, we really need to figure out what's going on with these food hubs because we need a better picture of what it could look like here in the Hudson Valley. So we interviewed 12 different food hubs from around the country and spent some time with them on the phone to figure out, what do their business models look like and are they making it? And if they are making it, how? If they're not, why? And there's 7 lessons learned here about what we think makes a food hub work. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll point your attention to number 2, 4, 6, and 7 here. So number 2, one of the big things we learned is that these food hubs realized farmers are not ready to meet them at the loading dock. That when they went into these communities, they went into these areas, or these areas sort of worked to build their own food hub, farmers needed some initial assistance with packing and obtaining new food safety certifications, because if they're going to scale up, there are new demands on the product and the distribution that these farms didn't have to confront before. This is not a long-term issue, though, that this was just a startup issue. There was a few months, some training or some hands-on work with the farms on their packing lines and that kind of thing, and then they were up and running. Number 4, products have to be marketed as high-value, source identified with a connection to the farms that produce them. So again, like I was saying before, it's not enough just to call it local and to say it's from the Hudson Valley, that there has to be other attributes, and that really the product has to be high value. It has to be a high-quality product, and so therefore it has to be unique from what they can get other places. And that high value could come just in the intrinsic quality of the food. It tastes better. It's fresher, or it's a unique variety that they can't get somewhere else, or I know that it comes from this farm, and I really want to support that farm, and I appreciate the story behind the food that brought it to me. Number 6, sadly, we also found that food hubs are not doing so hot financially. They continue to struggle to achieve financial viability. The biggest difference we found, so about half of those we interviewed were breaking even and half were not. And we tried to figure out, was it because the nonprofits just don't really need to make money or don't care about money or they have charitable contributions? That was my bias. I came in, full disclosure here, thinking that the nonprofits and the cooperatives are not going to be making money, and the for-profits, that's really where it's all at. And that's not true at all. We did not find that. Instead, what we found is that those who are making it have been in business longer, like 10 years, 5 years, or more, and that there's a difference in revenue, that there's got to be some kind of tipping point between 1.5 to 2 million in gross revenues, that in order to support all the capital investment that goes into starting a food hub, you need about 1.5 million to 2 million in gross revenues to make it float. I heard some, ooh, it's a lot of money. And then lastly, high quality staffing is one of the greatest challenges food hubs face, but also one of the greatest contributing factors for their success. We heard this from almost every single food hub we interviewed, that you need high quality staffing and that you need people who are not just mission driven and passionate, but really know what they're doing when it comes to food. They know what they're selling, they know what they're moving, they know how to, pack a truck, they know how to maintain cold chain and quality. And that the margins are so razor thin in this industry that you're going to make some mistakes, and those mistakes are going to be costly. And if you really invest in recruiting and training staff, that is going to help you make it. So we also did some research into the market. So we did about 113 interviews, we did some data analysis, we did some literature review, we did all kinds of stuff this past year. I'm not going to go through all of it now. We have about a 200-page technical report coming out in a few weeks, so I'm just going to tell you what we found. So the first thing is that food hub functions are needed. So that distribution function and the marketing function, that relationship building, that is needed because buyers and suppliers, some farms are doing great, but not everybody is. And not every farm knows about the market opportunities that are out there or how to seize on them. And so there is some marketing and relationship building between buyers and suppliers that needs to be done. And then there's also some on-farm assistance that could be that could help some farms scale up and tap into wholesale or higher volume markets. But the second thing is that we're not starting from scratch. So the previous presentation alluded to this too, that there are a lot of pre-existing relationships and infrastructure and distribution routes to bring local farm product to market. So what do we glean from all this? The bottom line is we don't think that there's one big central facility that needs to be built or, that needs to be somewhere out there in the Hudson Valley and we call it the food hub and then we bring everybody to that food hub. We don't think that model is going to work for the Hudson Valley. It's a big region, there's a lot of resources to build on, and it's a very diverse region, and there's a lot already going on. And so why should we supplant what's already happening? But rather what we recommend is that we need to build on and strengthen what's already happening. Yeah. So what would that look like? So first and foremost, we do need infrastructure in the Hudson Valley, but it needs to be right-sized infrastructure. So over the past couple generations, we have lost all of the small and mid-sized infrastructure, whether it's bottling lines or cold storage or processing for meat or dairy or other kinds of things, either on farm or third party, right? That there is a dearth of that kind of infrastructure for processing and distribution. So again, we don't need one centralized warehouse model of a food hub. What we need to do is focus on investment in on-farm infrastructure and processing infrastructure to support high-value products and value-added products. And then secondly, we need some value chain development. And so this comes back to the relationship building. So first, farmer services, helping farmers to get wholesale ready and really understanding, what does the market need? The Food Safety and Modernization Act is about to hit the ground, and we're going to be in big trouble if we don't get ready for it. Then the second thing is business and production planning. I was actually surprised at how many farms, when asked the question, do you need help with business and production planning, said yes. It was the majority of farms that we interviewed. We interviewed about a sample of about 50 farms throughout the Hudson Valley, and I was surprised. Everybody said, I really could use some help with that. And especially if they're going to get investment in infrastructure, knowing how to carry that debt and what that means for their operations over the next couple years as they're paying down that debt and trying to ramp up or tap into new wholesale market opportunities. Those are big questions, and so some assistance with those kinds of things, people told us would be valuable. And then relationship develop, and I would add to this, actually, product development. So product development is really important, and this really comes down to the value-added products. I was at another conference recently, and just a few days ago, and Steve Ells from Chipotle, the founder of Chipotle, was there. And he said something that really stuck with me, and it was both troubling but also informative. He was asked, how do you take these risks with your sustainable sourcing and working with family farms and making that a priority because it raises the cost of your food. How did you know that your customers would really want this? And he basically said he kind of took a flyer because all their marketing research said that the reasons why their customers were coming was because of convenience and the high quality of the product. And so even if all of these other values are motivating customers, we have to make sure that the product quality is there. So that came up as a need as well. And then, so the other thing that's needed is this relationship building, this value chain development, improving communication between suppliers and buyers so that as suppliers or as producers, you have a better sense of what the market opportunity is, but also the buyers out there know what's available. And then also assisting farmers with aggregation and logistics. And then the two market areas for higher scale, higher volume that are not currently being fully tapped are retail and institutions. So we think there should be a focus there. So recommendations for implementation. So what we're recommending is that the foundation that we're working with and others out there in the field who are interested in this focus on a few things. So the first is to pilot a local food distribution project, but focus it on services. Again, coordination on the supplier side, on the farmer side, and the producer side, and helping with aggregation, and then also help in getting wholesale ready and really understanding what packing needs are, what food safety certification needs are there. But then the second is coordinate infrastructure funding. So there are various streams of funding that are pre-existing, but for whatever reason, they're not fully accessed. And this can be something traditional like farm credit. I don't hear any groaning here, so maybe you guys all love farm credit, but the folks that we talked to didn't totally love farm credit. But then there are other streams like private investment and foundation investment and other kinds of government investment that are out there. So we think that someone should be coordinating all of this and really making it a lot easier for people to access that for infrastructure development. Then farmer business services, so this comes back to the business development, production planning. Also Hudson Valley Regional Food Systems Network, so some kind of convening that really cuts across different counties and geographies throughout the Hudson Valley. And then some additional research. And that's all spelled out in the report, which is hitting the ground in a few weeks. So I tried to think, what is my charge to everyone in this room? You always want to have like a charge, like, okay, this is what I'm doing, and what are you guys doing? And so I was really thinking about this, and I was thinking there are three things that you can do, I think, to really help with these efforts. First would be to find and embrace opportunities for collaboration. And again, this comes back to the fact that it's really hard to compete as a small and mid-sized producer, and the greatest chance that we're going to have for that to happen and to raise the level of competition is to find ways to collaborate and partner. The next thing is to identify your business's individual infrastructure and business planning needs and make them be known to people like me and others who are out there. And even if it's only at a concept phase yet, speak up, because I am not a farmer, okay? I'm not a food processor, but I am here to try and provide assistance to tap into the resources that are out there for you. So even if it's just a concept, that's where every really good project starts. And then lastly, just keep coming out and speaking up and taking stock and solace in the momentum that is here, because we're really experiencing a very special moment right now. And this is a remarkable time for food. So thank you, and I'm happy to do we have time for 1 or 2 questions? No?
Move on to the panel.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I'll be around after the next panel if you have any questions. Thanks.
So I'm Emily Deans. I'm the agricultural coordinator for Catskill Mountain Keeper. It's a not-for-profit environmental advocacy organization that's been working on various initiatives across the state for the past 6 years or so to help really promote and support the Catskill region as an area. And I know that Sarah just gave that really excellent presentation with an overview on sort of what food hubs are and where we are sort of in the state with different efforts and opportunities around food hub development. That's really, really exciting. So I don't need to give too much context on that. But these are all, Sonia has thoughtfully compiled a panel of food hub experts.
I'm Richard Giles. I own and operate Lucky Dog Farm. We're an organic vegetable farm in Hamden, New York, which is right dead center in the New York City watershed. And I should go on, since we're on the subject of food hubs, we're developing with the help of Rebecca Morgan at Cade a micro food hub. I've just discovered that's what it should be called. We're going to, we already go into the New York City green markets, and we occasionally haul other farmers' food to New York City. We do a small wholesale run in the city. And so this has become an outgrowth of that trip that we make anyway. And we got help from Cade this winter and spring. They had Wayne Millor, a really wonderful consultant, to help us to look at the food hub, see if it made sense, financially, because I think a lot of times farmers see things that make sense, but then work at them 10 or 20 or 30 years and realize they don't. So it's good to head some of that off. But it looks like for us the way, and for our region, good, thanks, that maybe a very small hub that grows naturally from a truck that's already going south makes sense. And I think in our area we're going to have some other similar efforts. So I think we can team up. There may be more than one truck going to the city a week.
Hi everybody, I'm Beth McKellips. I work for Cornell Cooperative Extension in Madison County, which is in central New York, or kind of the next rung of being upstate. And it's far enough upstate that it really isn't feasible for a lot of farmers to connect to the direct markets in New York City. But the thing we do have is a lot of great agriculture, especially livestock, given the topography of the area. So I am facilitating the development of a shared warehousing, processing, business incubator, farmer incubator, retail market center in central New York, and I applied for some funding through the Regional Economic Development Council, and we got it, and so we're moving ahead with developing the food hub in central New York.
I'm Jennifer Grossman, and I think the hat that I wear here today on this panel is really representing NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, in our work to figure out what could an organization known as the Lawyers for the Earth participate in this way. And one of the things that Sarah mentioned that's really important is the FSMA, the Food Safety Management Act that's coming out, that's going to be really impactful for small-scale farmers as well as hub managers. How do you safely package and put together and process and cold storage food? So maybe the role that NRDC can serve is to be a legal advisor or trainer or facilitator of some of these complex regulatory systems and assist with legal compliance.
My name is Olivia Blanchflower. I'm here representing Grow NYC and Green Market Co., which is our, very nearly fledgling food hub and distribution project in New York City. We've been operating for about 10 months now. We purchase product. I have a loud voice. We purchase product from small and mid-sized farmers from basically Pennsylvania, New Jersey, on up north to Maine, but the majority of our suppliers are from New York State. We purchase product from these farmers, aggregate in a refrigerated warehouse facility, and then distribute client orders throughout New York City. Currently, we're working with between 30 and 40 farmers. We began just distributing fresh produce. Now that since the fresh season fell off, we have expanded into regional grains, some dairy products, and other shelf-stable things like dried beans and honey. We serve currently, we've served 80 clients, around 80 clients in the New York City area, and those include restaurants, retailers, institutions like senior centers, and Grow NYC's food access programming, which includes the Youth Market program. It's a network of youth-run farm stands in the city, and also our Fresh Food Box program, which is a group buying program. So, we sort of have a dual mission, not only to support farmers, but to leverage our big purchasing power to get more fresh produce to folks who need it in the city.
I'm Rebecca Morgan with CADE, and we are, CADE's mission is to increase the economic viability of small-scale and sustainable producers in sort of the southern tier and Catskill region. So CADE is working with Lucky Dog and more on the sort of get wholesale ready component that Sarah was talking about, just working with producers. What are the mechanisms that you need to go through in order to scale up production on your farm and coordinate with that high quality harvesting and packing and whatnot? So we are going to lead a series of workshops actually at Lucky Dog starting April 8th is our first one. April 8th at 2 p.m. at Lucky Dog. And the goal is really to bring interested producers together, both whether or not you're interested in participating in via the Lucky Dog route or in another micro hub that might make more sense elsewhere, but just to sort of go through that learning curve, to get on the learning curve of what producers need to do in order to be sort of wholesale ready. So that's one thing. And another thing I wanted to just mention, Derek is from Corbin Hill Farms, and he reached out to me the other day too, saying, he's looking for producers in Otsego County that are interested in coordinating into a micro hub in that region to sort of support the Corbin Hills Farm Food Hub distribution. So, again, these sort of grassroots-based micro hubs that are cropping up, I think, present a really exciting opportunity. And I like how Sarah sort of reinforced that you don't necessarily want to be so top-heavy and just start by repaying this huge debt repayment loan. So it's exciting.
My name is Paul Oliver. I'm a farmer and founder of Hudson Valley Farms. We aggregate product from 40 farms in Hudson Valley, meat, vegetables, fruit, and we distribute to New York City, New Jersey, and Connecticut to about 200 accounts, which range from retailers and Whole Foods to restaurants, institutions, and caterers. Much of the product comes in a fresh state, others like cut, frozen meat, shelf-stable, frozen vegetables. We try to unlock more value out of that processing.
Okay, great. Thank you all. So this is clearly a really diverse panel, and some of you touched a little bit on various aspects of this, but if possible, if you could talk sort of about the structuring for those of you who already are engaged in specific food hub projects, what the structuring is, whether you decide to go a nonprofit or a cooperative or a for-profit model, and sort of what size and what infrastructure you have that supports, or what infrastructure are you looking toward that will support the kind of whether it's distribution or whether it's processing, that will support the sort of hub you're looking to create or you have already created.
Going down the line again?
However you want to do it.
Is this on?
Is this thing on?
Okay, I never can tell. I think I already covered that. We're very small. We're a small farm. We have talked to Lydia at Green Market Co., and I think she provides a really key element in the food hub thing. She has several hats, but she's going to act as a last mile distributor. So we can still, you as a farmer, I as a farmer, can still keep ownership of the food till it gets to her. And so there's only one more link to the final user of the food, or at least to the retailer or to the restaurant, so that you have more of that connection that both Jennifer and Sarah talked about between the farmer and the food. And I think that's because I go to markets, I see a lot of that need, that want for connection between the buyer or the eater and the farmer. So I think that's, for us, that looks like a really positive thing. I did want to say one other thing as I look down the panel here, completely off the subject, but when these first Jennifer and Rebecca were standing up here, and then Sarah, I realized, fit in the same category. I think we definitely need to have an interim appointment of new co-agriculture secretary, and it should be these three. We would be in much better shape.
So I'm not following anyone's advice, and we're going fairly large scale. And one thing that I've learned since I've received a large grant and been accessing and working on the financing, one thing I found that's unique is that this project is, although I'm facilitating the project and it's fairly hands-on facilitation at this point, is that the project that I'm starting is farmer-owned and farmer-driven. And I think that's an important point to make, is that a lot of food hubs that I've been hearing about, they have operated on the premise that if you build it, they will come, and that hasn't always been the case. And I think that's been part of the piece of the profitability challenge. So I think that for anyone who's getting involved in these projects, just don't lose sight of your producers, because you need them. Structure-wise, it's going to be a for-profit LLC that's going to manage the overall facility, build out the space, put in the utilities, offer and then manage the administrative services that will be managed, which will be sales and marketing, accounting, bookkeeping, things like that farmers often need but don't need full time, and then some general management, quality assurance, logistics management help. So what we're really working on is really creating a scalable business, and hopefully this will help with our profitability. There'll be very much a a la carte menu of services available to farmers, from like the administrative services that I've already mentioned, to just renting space in our cooler and freezer space, to participating in the farmers markets, to processing in the community kitchen just to do their own value-added product. And all the way to the other end of the spectrum of putting in some value-added meat processing, and it's almost going to be operating like our shopping mall concept, where farmers can come in and have a lot of the infrastructure in place that the shared costs will help them make putting that investment into processing feasible, and they will be encouraged to co-pack and the leases and the business will be structured so anyone who puts in processing equipment will be encouraged to co-pack, and so that will help increase their profitability as well. So I think I covered all the questions. As far as infrastructure goes, it's already there. I think that you really have to be smart about it and think about, is it more cost effective to just go through third-party logistics for trucking? Can you do some backhauling, cross-docking situations that will really help? So, but those will all kind of have to shake out as the business develops.
So Grow NYC is a 40-year-old not-for-profit in New York City, and Green Market Co. is a program of that nonprofit organization. Better known, I think, is the Green Market Farmers Market program, which has been running in the city for, I think, 35 or 40 years, and we sort of consider Green Market Co. a sister program or a complement to the successful Green Market program. There's a good deal of wholesaling going on at the retail markets, but it's not a feasible model for everybody. The majority of the folks picking up cases of produce or cases of dairy or what have you, the majority of those wholesale buyers are restaurants. Not all of them live convenient, or not all of them are situated near a green market. And it's not super easy to organize those logistics. So Green Market Co. is here to sort of provide distribution services for farmers in the Green Market network or outside of it, and also tap into larger wholesale farmers who can serve institutions or retailers. We have a physical hub. Since we opened, or since we launched, we've been operating out of a portion of a refrigerated warehouse facility owned by City Harvest, which is a food rescue organization in the city. In June, though, we'll be in our own space, wherever that may be, somewhere in the Bronx. And we also have a couple of trucks, one that we lease and one that we purchased with a grant from the city. And it's a terrifying prospect owning something, owning that large equipment. We've only had it for a week, and I'm already dreading the first time it breaks down. I'm sure Tal can tell great stories about that. So yeah, we're going the infrastructure route. We are a nonprofit, and as I alluded to before, the revenues from our sales to our clients, like restaurants, caterers, institutions, etc., go to support or supplement the cost of produce that go to our food access programming that serves low-income consumers in the city. That's all the questions, right? Thanks.
So KHEAT is a nonprofit, and our role really with the food hub development in Delaware County, potentially coordinating with Corbin Hills and Otsego County, is much more just increasing producer capacity to participate in these types of programs. So we will not own any of those food hubs that we're discussing. We're just really trying to work with the producers to get them on board. So that's our role.
We're a for-profit. Been around 2 years. Our first 2 years we spent kind of cobbling together infrastructure. As we all know, what's happened in the last few decades, small to medium-sized regional infrastructure didn't really dismantle. So it was putting the patchwork together, slaughterhouse, cooler capacity, freezer capacity, and a processing and distribution facility. We recently were recipient of a grant from New York State through ATC. Co-recipient with Farm Table in Kingston, which is where we got distribution out of, and where we process shelf-stable and frozen vegetables. That first 2 years, we started ramping up from a couple days a week in the city, now 5 days a week, 6 days a week in New York City, New Jersey, and so the initial hurdle for us was having the existing infrastructure to reach the markets we wanted to reach, while keeping it open to small, medium-sized farms. They range from 5 to 10 acres to several hundred acres. And we cross-dock, farmers share rides, help us aggregate what's at every spot, sometimes carry distribution to pickups, and it's more of a kind of living organism the infrastructure put together, and the grants can help us move forward and provide the distribution logistics that allow larger customers to affect change and help us scale up need and require.
Great, thank you. So next question I had, it sounds like a lot of everyone's structured a little bit differently. Everyone has sort of different capacities right now. At what stage do you all do you get involved with the producers? Is it more of a relationship, because I'm guessing most of you are going to the market and having those connections and those direct conversations. Do you go to the producers and recommend to them that they grow certain things, that you tell them about market trends, or is it more that you just see what's available at the time and then you take and process or distribute whatever's available that the producers are bringing to you?
Yeah. I think for us so far, again, it's been a more casual feedback system that for our own produce, we read the market and try to produce to that market, and with other producers who have sold through us and will sell through us, I think it's very similar whether we're going through Olivia's Green Market Co. or directly to buyers. There's that great advantage that you have that direct feedback, and I think it's essential that we keep that direct feedback connection. I need you to grow this next year, knowing that it might not be as immediate as a Baldor kind of connection, that yes, I'll have it on the plane from Chile next week, but it'll be that we have this farmer that we can trust, the buyer we hope would trust as our buyers to us, that we'll try to grow what they need.
As I briefly mentioned, and I'll go briefly into a tiny bit of backstory, is that the project that I'm working on developed out of my facilitation of working with 4 different farmer cooperatives about hiring some shared personnel, and that kind of snowballed into a shared facility. And so I have producers, already involved, and they're going to be the principal owners and are driving the project. The one thing that's interesting, though, is that the farmers that are at the table right now are not necessarily the typical farmers that you would see getting involved in the local food and creating a local food distribution company, and they're very much large-scale commodity crop and dairy farmers. That's been a really interesting, to me, that gives me a little bit of optimism. Going back to what Rebecca was saying this morning about, our large-scale traditional growers are starting to see the opportunities in the local food market and starting to not only change their production ways, but just really open their eyes to the marketing opportunity. And then the next thing I wanted to say is, just as far as working with producers, as soon as we got this grant, I said to the farmers I'm working with, you have to hire a project manager because otherwise this project won't go. And they listened to me, which is great, and that person is already is very much actively reaching out to farmers, and will continue to develop those relationships all the way. So I just also want to highlight something that Sarah said about the high quality staffing, that is really a huge need, and that for all the non-farmers in the room, that is a role that we really need to hone a skill and a task we really need to work on as much as we can.
Just in a general sense of supply and demand, what sort of is the tail that wags the dog? Is it what you're producing or what the request or demand is? One of the things with local food systems is this wonderful appreciation and understanding of seasonality. And you're seeing that both in the consumers, the eaters, the chefs, the restaurants, the purchasers. So there's an enjoyment of the fact that things will shift and you will not have them at certain times of the year that makes you appreciate them more. That sometimes your beef might taste differently in the spring than it does in the fall, than it does in the winter. And that there's really this joy of that. And it's fun to work with, and it's interesting and exciting to go and eat foods that shift like this. That being said, there's also great progress with year-round hoop house greenhouses that are allowing us to extend our seasons. And it's a great opportunity to think about how our local communities can really provide food year-round that is still, again, resilient and natural for the areas that we're in. That a local food system doesn't mean that everything you eat has to come locally. We're not going to be growing papayas and pineapples and oranges, well, at least in the next maybe 20 years. But it's a respect for seasonality. So I think that all ends of the system seem to be understanding that.
As far as when we started approaching or working with producers, Green Market Co. is sort of the official foray into distribution for Grow NYC, but we had been moving food around the city on a very, very small scale for about 6 years with our youth market program. we were renting U-Haul vans and driving around to sometimes 3 or 4 different farmers markets in a day, tossing it on there and then unloading it at different market sites. The youth market program is designed to benefit farmers through direct wholesaling, give them access to an underserved community that wouldn't be profitable for them to set up a market in, but Grow NYC can set up a consolidated stand run by youth, and that community gets food access, the farmer still gets some income. So we were running these stands for 6 or 7 years, and just from the very beginning, schools or restaurants or other small businesses near the farm stands would say, hey, can you throw in an extra box of squash for us? And we'd love to have apples for our school fundraiser, things like that. So we're sort of doing it on an ad hoc basis and working with a group of farmers who sell at the wholesale farmers market in the Bronx, sourcing a lot of our stuff through them, and then also tapping into the network of green market farmers. So we sort of went into this knowing that there was a pool of producers that we could pull from, and then they hosted meetings for us with their neighbors, and as we go, we're pulling in more product. A lot of the products and a lot of the producers that we bring on has a lot to do with client demand, because when we started, we had a fairly limited product line, and then a client would say, we'd really love French radishes, and we'd be like, okay, hold on, who has French radishes? And then we would go out and find them and say, okay, now we have them. And that's sort of how we've developed the product line to this point. It's very much consumer driven. There's a huge demand for local food. A lot of our clients want to get as much as they can that's come from a local farm. But at the same time, it's also great because we can say, okay, we want X, Y, and Z from you, producer, and they'll say, okay, I also have this, and we'll throw that on the availability list, and our clients take interest in those products as well. So it sort of comes from both sides.
I would just say briefly that one of the efforts that Kate is going to be going through as well is really contacting the local schools and the local institutions and try to identify what, we hear a lot from the schools that we would like to have more food in the cafeterias, but who can produce 200 pounds of potatoes that we can afford, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we really are trying to identify product lists coming from those local institutions that we can then work with producers, perhaps not this season, but in seasons to come, so that we can, have that relationship building from the local side as well.
We use a very collaborative approach. We have a calendar of seasonality that we work with our customers with to expect, a ballpark range of when they can expect certain vegetable or fruit. That is augmented depending on what farmers have one earlier or late. We then take requests as well from customers, products they're looking for, things they can't get, something they source locally. We arrange pre-season for products we think we need grown for yada or something we want to put away frozen or shelf stable. And we also serve as a clearing for farmers when they get into a abundance of certain product. They have a wholesale or commercial account that canceled, or a restaurant that closed, and now they found themselves in a supply of X, Y, or Z, and we work towards clearing that. We reach out to our customers in emails and phone calls and invite them to be supplied and see if we can help facilitate things out of that. So it's kind of everybody has to input.
Okay. Well, there's so much knowledge on this panel. Great work, Sonia, for pulling together all these amazing participants, and thank you all for participating. I feel like we could talk forever. I know that we're getting close to lunch. I'm sure everyone's stomach is starting to make that same sound mine is. But we have a lot of Catskills producers and people, farmers and people who are involved in various food businesses here. It would be great to sort of take this time to really collaborate. And I know Richard had said that there was going to be at lunch, which I think is what we're moving to next. If you're interested in getting involved in somehow from, whether you're a producer or distributor or whatever, if you want to learn more and figure out and become more involved in this collaboration, some of these exciting projects, then definitely seek some of these folks out at lunch. And I've been told that that you're allowed to harass them, so I can encourage that. And then I think we're moving to lunch. Okay, we're moving to lunch. So thank you all.